Okay, we're going to get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Serena Goodrich of LPI, and I'd like to welcome you to the third and final session in this three-part series on how to become a part of NASA's planetary sample science community, which is sponsored by NASA and LPI. We'll be having a presentation today about obtaining NASA funding, and that will be followed by a question and answer session. If you have questions for the speaker, please feel free to enter them into the chat at any time. But do keep in mind that we won't be monitoring raised hands. So if you do have a question, you need to use the chat. After the presentation is over, we will be reading the questions to the speaker, alternating between the questions in the chat and some questions that were submitted online ahead of time. So today's speaker is Dr. Catherine Robinson, usually known as Katie, from NASA headquarters. And the title of her talk is How to Obtain NASA PSD, Planetary Science Division funding to support NASA Astromaterials investigations. Katie earned a Bachelor's of Science in Geophysical Sciences at the University of Chicago. She then got her first taste of planetary geology research as an undergraduate at LPI, studying Apollo samples with Dr. Alan Treeman. She went on to earn her PhD from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, studying water in evolved rocks with Jeff Taylor. She then continued research into lunar volatiles during two postdoc positions at the Open University and at the Lunar Planetary Institute before joining NASA headquarters in 2004 as a program scientist. So take it away, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk, and hopefully we're all going to learn something useful today about how to get NASA funds to support astromaterials investigations. So, like Serena said, I am Katie Robinson. My background is in sample science. I joined NASA headquarters in January of 2024. I am currently the lead for the LARS program, which I'll talk about later today. And I'm the technical officer for solar system workings in the Lunar Data Analysis program. Essentially, my research interests have really focused on samples, particularly lunar samples, lunar water, hydrogen isotopes, general planetary volatiles, and especially my favorite, the Apollo 15 quartz monzodiorites and other lunar evolved rocks. I'm also particularly interested in situ measurement techniques like SIMS. So we have a variety of programs through NASA that support astromaterial studies. They're not specifically only dedicated to astromaterials, except for LARS, which I'll get into a little bit later, but they do all support sample studies in some way. We have Emerging Worlds, Solar System Workings, the Laboratory Analysis of Returned Samples, aka LARS, FINEST, which is a program for obtaining funding for graduate students. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today about FINEST, but I figured there'd be a lot of early career folks in here who may be looking for ways to support their graduate students, and the FINEST program is one place you can look for funding for that. And FINEST does support sample studies. Starting in ROSES 2025, we will also have the Solar System Science, aka S-Cubed program. So I just mentioned ROSES. What is ROSES? ROSES is basically the omnibus NASA research announcement, which has all the like fundamental research that NASA supports, all comes in ROSES. So it's research opportunities in space and Earth sciences. This covers everything that NASA's Science Mission Directorate funds for science research. Specific program elements, or calls, are found in different appendices. We're mostly going to be talking about Appendix C today, which is planetary science. If you're interested in FINEST, that's a cross-divisional program, so it'll be in Division F. The most important thing for you all to know about ROSES is that the ROSES year is offset from the calendar year, and program elements, or calls, change year to year by the ROSES year. So if you're looking at applying to a program, it's very important that you know what ROSES year you're in and make sure you're submitting to the correct program element. So for example, ROSES 24 covers all of our program. ROSES 24 runs from February 14th, 2024 to March 28th, 2025. There's deliberately a little bit of overlap between ROSE's years. So ROSE's 24 and ROSE's 25 do overlap slightly. And this is to make sure we don't lose any proposals in that in-between period. And I have a link to the ROSE's frequently asked questions if you want to know more about that. So getting into the specific programs where you can propose to do astromaterials research. I'm going to start with Emerging Worlds. Emerging Worlds covers the early solar system. So this is investigations that address compelling scientific questions into the formation and early evolution of our solar system. And these proposals generally include activities that are theoretical, analytical, or experimental studies, as well as efforts that partially or wholly rely on synthesis of previous works. This can include studies for astromaterials. This can include studies of meteorites, lunar rocks, including Apollo and Luna samples, cosmic dust, pre-solar grains, etc. You can submit to Emerging Worlds at any time before March 28th, 2025. It's no due date. So you can apply. What no due date in this case means is you can submit your proposal whenever you'd like during the ROSE's year. Our goal is that you get an answer about whether your proposal is selected or declined within 180 days of submission. If you do decide to submit to Emerging World, you can do that up until March 28th. After March 28th, projects relevant to Emerging Worlds should be submitted to Solar System Science. I'll talk more about Solar System Science later, but that's where you're going to go if you submit in that period. For ROSE's 24, we expect the program budget for the first year of new awards to be about $5 million, which corresponds to about 25 new awards per year. In Emerging Worlds 2023, so ROSE's 24 is still occurring, and it will be occurring until March of next year. ROSE's 23 ended earlier this year. So we have statistics for ROSE's 23. So the ROSE's 23 statistics for Emerging Worlds were funding rate of about 52%. So about 52% of proposals were selected for funding. Some examples of recent Emerging Worlds research. Emerging Worlds is a really cool program. We do there's a lot of interesting science here, and it ranges everything from, chronology of the early solar system, looking at metamorphism in carbonaceous chondrites. You can also look at the moon. Early lunar projects could be submitted to Emerging Worlds, for example. So the next program I'm going to talk about is solar system workings. And solar system workings is basically everything in the solar system that is occurring during the time or the large planetary bodies were in or near their modern configuration. So Emerging Worlds is early solar system stuff. Solar system workings is everything that happens after that. And in solar system workings, our typical studies are, about planetary bodies, satellites and rings, including interiors, materials, surfaces, atmospheres, exospheres, magnetospheres, and processes as they occur within the solar system, or that involve terrestrial analogs of planetary materials and or environments. This includes work on meteorites, lunar rocks, which includes Apollo and Luna samples, as well as lunar meteorites, cosmic dust, analogs. This is not an extensive list, but it's just some options. Like Emerging Worlds, solar system workings is no due date. You can submit anytime in the ROSE's year for your proposal to be considered. However, after March 28, 2025, projects that are considered relevant to SSW should be submitted to Solar System Science instead. The expected program budget for the first year of new awards for solar system workings this year, ROSE's 24, is about $7 million, which is about 40 new awards. Last year, the SSW selection rate was about 29%. So some recent examples of sort of the broad range of work we see in solar system workings. Noble gas isotopes in Martian samples, experiments on the behavior of melt inclusions in various planetary rocks, lunar glasses and magnetization, as well as looking at origin and time scale to lunar magnesium sweet magnetism. So you've heard me mention solar system science a few times now. So new in 2025 Emerging worlds, solar system observations, and solar system workings will be merging into one program. This program will be called Solar System Science, and this will be starting in ROSES 2025. There will be a short period in which you can apply to both SSW, so you could apply to SSW, EW, or SSO, or S cubed, as we're calling Solar System Science. You can't send the same proposal to both programs. That's considered duplicative. You can send it to one of the original three or S cubed. Some of the major changes that are coming in 2025 and with S cubed is that S cubed is dual anonymous. So this means that when the panel is evaluating your proposal, they will not be aware of the proposer's name or institution. I'll talk a little bit more about DAPR later. But this will require you to write your proposals in a different format than you would have necessarily used for EW or SSW. That's super important. You have to write in an anonymized fashion. Again, I'll talk more about that later. But it's really important to keep that in mind because proposals can and will be declined for non-compliance. We have resources available that I'm going to link to in this talk that will help you prepare proposals for dual anonymous peer review. I also mentioned a program called LARS, Laboratory Analysis of Returned Samples. This is a slightly smaller program than our other two. Our expected budget for LARS is about $2.5 million, about 10 new awards per year. LARS has two different funding streams. One is through development of laboratory instrumentation and or advanced techniques that would be required for analysis of current or future returned samples. So basically, if you wanted to develop a new instrumental technique to, say, look at samples that are coming back from Artemis, LARS would be one way you could propose to do that. Not just Artemis, of course. There are lots of potential sample return missions upcoming. You can also propose to work on samples that we already have that have been returned, but you're going to be proposing to develop a new technique to examine them. What we're looking for in these development proposals is we're looking for focus on gaps in current capabilities of ground-based laboratories. If you're going to do a development proposal through LARS, it's not just buying a piece of equipment off the shelf and setting it up. It does need to have a substantial component of developing a new technique or really improving upon an existing technique. It's also important in these proposals that you need to address the scientific importance of making such analyses on samples to be returned from these missions and the timeliness of starting the development now. If you're, say, going to be looking at samples that are coming back from Mars sample return, you need to justify, okay, this is why it's important that we start working on this now rather than in 5 years. The other funding stream that's available through LARS is for direct analysis of certain samples that have already been returned to Earth. It's a very specific subset of our sample collections through NASA that are allowed to be studied using LARS. For ROSES 24, this includes Genesis, Stardust, Hayabusa, Hayabusa 2, and OSIRIS-REx. That will be changing somewhat in ROSES 25, in that we will be rolling Genesis and Stardust off of this program. However, if you're interested in working with Genesis and Stardust samples, you can propose to Solar System Science. Last year, our ROSES 23 funding rate for LARS was 63%. Another thing to point out, for LARS, the Apollo and Luna samples are not eligible for study in this program. It's just the 5 that I've listed here. And for ROSES 25, it'll be Hayabusa, Hayabusa 2, and OSIRIS-REx. Since this does tend to come up in LARS, we do want to remind you all that RNA programs are not intended to provide additional support for mission scientists to carry out activities within the scope of a mission. So if you're on the OREX team and you are wanting to propose, if your proposal team has individuals who were associated with an active mission, and the proposal has content that might be construed as mission related, you need to demonstrate in the proposal that the work will not be being used to support mission work. And we will evaluate them for degree of overlap with mission activities. Some examples of recent work we've funded through LARS include looking at space weathering on samples from Ryugu, paleomagnetism of Bennu, development of laser ablation ICP-MS system, looking at isotopic parentage of return samples, and also looking at crystalline silicates from the outer solar system. So where do you find information about all of our excellent opportunities for funding? You'll want to start at NSPIRES. NSPIRES is NASA's proposal management system. All of the program elements that I've just described, sometimes referred to as calls, can be found under solicitations. Little solicitation button up here. You'll use NSPIRES to submit proposals to and receive notifications about proposal status. NSPIRES is also used to submit proposal evaluations during review. So if you volunteer to be a reviewer, which we highly recommend, it's a great way to learn how to write a proposal. You submit your evals through NSPIRES. This is especially important for early career folks and other folks who tend to be moving around fairly often. It's important to keep your contact info that's attached to your NSPIRES account up to date. This helps us find you if you volunteered to be a reviewer, for example, and it makes sure your affiliation is up to date so we know where your conflicts of interest might be and how to get in touch with you. So in order to find your solicitations, you're going to want to either click on solicitation or go to the search function in NSPIRES. You can find any of our solicitations under solicitations. You can search either by using the full program name, such as Emerging Worlds, or the abbreviation EW. For programs with no due date, you might see in this middle column here, or this program proposal deal column. If the program has no due date, the proposal due date column shows the last day possible it can be submitted to be considered under that ROSES year. Past or closed solicitations are useful if you want to see a summary of work that's previously selected by the program, or if you need to look up an old solicitation for some reason. So once you find your call, we can go through what you see when you find your call. So for this example, I'm looking at solar system workings. The title of the program element up here, and Appendix C is Planetary, remember? The notices section will have kind of a summary of all the information that's contained in all of these documents that are linked to the right. There's a lot of you can access a lot of general information from each individual call. This all goes to, say, the entire ROSES call, ROSES summary of solicitation. There's important information in general in there for how you submit proposals to NASA, and important things you should include. There's also like checklists you can use to make sure you include everything, tables with all the program elements in due date order, stuff like that. You also very much want to take a look at general planetary proposal information here. This is probably going to be the most useful for you to look at as you're developing your proposals. You have the C.1 Planetary Science Research Program Overview, and then a link to the specific program element as well. So you'll hear us refer to C1 from time to time, and this is the Planetary Science Research Overview. There's a link in the presentation to the text if you want to see it. This part of the program, this part of Appendix C contains information that generally applies to planetary program elements. It will update each ROSES year. There's usually a little note that tells you what's changed. C1 contains important information about proposal compliance, including but not limited to submission and resubmission processes, like when you can resubmit your proposal if it's declined, relevance, data management plans, formatting, dual anonymous peer review, using Astromaterials and/or mission data in your proposals, resources for proposers. There's a lot of really important information in here, and we highly recommend that you do read the whole thing. It's kind of long, but it is worth reading. You should keep in mind, however, that some program elements do have specific and potentially different requirements than what's laid out in C1. You can avoid getting declined for non-compliance. Just make sure you're careful. So when you're actually looking at a program element, what are we looking for within our program element? So for example, I have, this is the very first page of the solar system workings program element. The most important thing you're going to want to look at is the scope of the program. And this includes what research can be submitted to the program and be considered relevant. You'll also find other program-specific information and requirements for each program. Exclusions, so science that is not solicited by the specific program element, is also important. You want to make sure you're not going to submit something that will be declined because it's not relevant to your program. It also discusses the submission process, if there's due date or no due date, if it will be reviewed with dual anonymous peer review, etc. At the very bottom of a program element, there'll be a summary of key information table. Among some of the useful information that you'll find in that table are the approximate funding for new awards, award duration, due dates, and most importantly, the point of contact for the program. That is where you're going to want to start if you have questions about the program, or if you're not sure if your stuff is relevant, or any questions about the program, you can always direct to the program officers and we will help you out. We go back to the other page, back to the main page for each program element. It can also be really useful to look at selected proposals. When selections are made, abstracts and titles are publicly posted online and they can be accessed through the program elements page. For no due date programs, this typically happens a few times a year, whenever selections are made. So abstracts of selected work can be helpful when determining which program best suits your project. If you're not really sure, you might want to see where other people have submitted. It's a good place to look. But you can always ask your program officers if you're concerned about relevance. Definitely talk to us if you are not sure where you think your proposal should go, if it could be potentially relevant to two different programs. Talk to us and we'll figure it out. We want to make sure your proposal is going to the most appropriate program, so it has it's in the place it's best suited to be. So I've mentioned dual anonymous peer review a lot. So in dual anonymous peer review, proposers are unaware of the identity of the members on the review panel, but the reviewers also do not have explicit knowledge of the identities of the proposing team during the scientific evaluation of the proposal. And this is going to be the default for all of our ROSES programs going ahead in ROSES 25. So S cubed, which will be replacing EW, SSW, and SSO, will be dual anonymous. There are a few programs that are going to be receiving a DAPR exemption, but none of the ones that I've talked about here will be getting an exemption. The thing to remember about DAPR is it's not to make it impossible to guess the identities of the proposers. It's to keep the focus of the discussion on the science rather than on people who are proposing the science. We are proud at NASA to be leading in the implementation of dual anonymous peer review for federal proposal evaluation. And we do understand that this is going to be a major shift in proposing. It is going to change how you have to write your proposals. So make sure you give yourself enough time to write your proposals, use the resources, which I'm going to link on the next page, and feel free to reach out to your program officers if you need help. So this is a whole bunch of links. You should be able to access these. The proposal slides will be available at the end of the talk. For dual anonymous peer review, there are a number of there are guidelines that are available to you. There's DAPR training available, and there's also tools and presentations from like the May 21st town hall about DAPR that will hopefully help you all prepare your presentations in this new format. So what about, how do we address Astromaterials samples in proposals? So if you've seen some of the other talks in this proposal, in this seminar series, you will have heard about the process for getting Astromaterials samples. So when it comes to applying for funding, if you look at section 3.5 of C1, there is information about how you address Astromaterials in proposals. Essentially, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have access to the samples before funding will be awarded to you. So before your funding arrives, you have to send us some sort of proof that you will have access to the samples that you say you'll have access to in your proposal. Depending on the extent of sample analysis in the proposed work, this might take a couple of different forms if you're selected. Your proposal may be designated as selectable. This means it is selectable, meaning it is currently selected or it is not either selected or declined. Once you provide supporting information indicating the samples will be made available to the team in sufficient quantity for the requisite tasks to be carried out, then it can be selected. Can also be, the proposals can also be selected with a contingency in that continued funding after year one or another period of time will be contingent on sample acquisition. This should be demonstrated in year one progress report or providing approval to the program officer. You do not need to have samples in hand prior to the release of funds. Proposers must only demonstrate that they will receive the samples. So you have a letter from a sample announcement of opportunity or an email selection letter from the Astromaterials Allocation Review Board, et cetera. If there is a requirement for some increment of funding, so if you need to prepare for your sample acquisition, then please reach out to your program officer and have the discussion and see what we can do. So if you're going to be using NASA's Astromaterials, and there are other Astromaterials you can use for proposals, for example, sometimes JAXA does proposals for using some of the Hayabusa 2 samples. That is also allowable. If you're going to be using NASA Astromaterials, you make your request to the Astromaterials Allocation Review Board. Different collections have different deadlines, and some have no deadlines. This is really important to keep track of, and to kind of keep an eye on where that falls with when you submit your proposal. If you want to learn more about the AARB, you can take a look at the link here in this presentation. The order of operations, so timing of NASA ROSE's program submission for funding versus the AARB request for the sample does not necessarily matter. ROSE's proposals do not require that you have the sample in hand when the proposal is submitted. AARB requests do not require that you have the funding secured in order to conduct analyses. Determining the appropriate order of operations for this research is up to the PI. Funding for proposals that require Astromaterials has been handled differently and inconsistently in the past, and this is an effort in order for us to standardize our practices and set expectations with the community and to better manage our program funds. So again, you do not have to have samples in hand when you write your proposal. Before you get funding, you do need to demonstrate that you'll have access to them. All right, I went really fast. So I will wrap up with a quick description of all the folks you can reach out to if you have questions about the programs that I've talked about today. For Emerging Worlds, you want to use the Emerging Worlds group inbox. When you see these program inboxes, it means multiple program officers have access, and we're able to get back to your questions more quickly. So for Emerging Worlds, the 2 program officers are Julie Ziffer and Curtis Williams. For Solar System Workings, you can reach out to me, Curtis Williams, at the SSW inbox. For LARS, Laboratory Analysis of Returned Samples, you can reach out to me, Curtis Williams. Finest, the planetary section of Finest, the program officers are Julie Ziffer and Amanda Nam. Starting in ROSES 2025, we'll have Solar System Science. We have the inbox right there. It's not super active yet, but we do have it, and we will be checking it. Also, you may be interested in checking out the Extraterrestrial Materials Analysis Group, XMAG. This is a community-based interdisciplinary group that provides a forum for discussion and analysis of matters concerning the collection, curation, and analysis of extraterrestrial samples. I'll take questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That was really very helpful, very informative.
Oh, good.
I am not seeing at the moment any questions in the chat, probably because you did such a good job. But I have one question of my own, actually. You said that abstracts of selected proposals can be viewed online.
Yep.
I wanted to make sure that's only the abstracts. You can't see the whole proposal.
No, it's just the abstract and the title and the PI.
And the PI, no other information like the team, just the, or
Nope.
is it
Just the PI.
Okay, great. Alex, do you want to read a question from the spreadsheet? You are muted.
Well, that would help. Okay, so the first question is funding also possible for European researchers?
You need to have an affiliation with an American institution.
Okay.
There's a question in the chat now. What will the total budget be for S cubed?
We're still finalizing that, but Yeah, we're still finalizing that.
So we have a two-part question here. So it says, what specific elements do you look in for funding a proposal to ensure it aligns with NASA's strategic goals in planetary science? And then the second question would be, are there particular themes or areas of research within Astromaterials that the Planetary Science Division is prioritizing for funding in the coming years?
So that information is going to be in your program elements. Each program element should have a description of kind of what they're looking for. And some program elements have a description of, you know, what might be prioritized or might be emphasized. For example, Lars is interested in development of an analytical techniques for samples that may be coming back in the future. So all that information should be in your program elements.
Okay, and then we have a three-part question. So it says, are there specific eligibility criteria that applicants needs to meet? Is this funding open to graduate and postdocs? Is the funding renewable, and can an applicant apply for an extension to cover other phases of the investigation?
So that all depends on the program. All that information should be in your program elements. Most of these awards are between 1 to 3 years. Some programs allow 4 years, but the 4th year does need to be very well justified in the proposal. We do allow no cost extensions. So if you don't, for many programs, if you don't, so that means if you don't spend all of your money during the initial, perhaps 3 years, during the initial 3 years of your thing, you can, you know, apply to be able to use that money for a period after that. I'm sorry, I forgot the first question of the 3.
No worries. It says, are there specific eligibility criteria that applicants need to meet?
Okay. So eligibility criteria for acquiring samples would be up to the AARB. For, say, graduate students and postdocs, that depends on the rules at your institution. Some institutions allow postdocs to be PIs on proposals. Some have them be a science PI, for example, and they have another person at the institution be the PI. Yeah, that is all dependent on your institution.
We got another question in the chat now. Can you fund international travel and fees to conduct analyses, or do we need to use only instruments in the United States?
You can propose for international travel to do analysis.
Including, but it's not asking only about travel, but for fees. I'm imagining they mean fees to pay for the use of, say, a Sims in some other country or something like that.
I'm going to need to get back to you on that.
Yeah.
I can't remember off the top of my head, and I don't want to answer incorrectly.
Yeah, okay. Alex, do you have more questions there?
Yes, I have 2 more. So the following question says, how about future constructional aspect in Moon and Mars for long-term exploration using 3D printing technology?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
It says, how about future constructional aspect in Moon and Mars for long-term exploration using 3D printing technology?
I'm not sure that's not really in the scope of the presentation here.
The following question says, will your answers to all the questions be available to the public, and will you inform us where to access them?
I believe the slides are going to be posted by LPI, and I believe a recording of this talk will also be made available.
Yes, that is correct. So it'll be a couple weeks before they are online, but we will send an email to everyone who has registered for the meeting to make sure that you guys have access to those presentations and recordings.
I have another question of my own. You said that the DAPR conditions apply to the science evaluation. Does that mean that the anonymity does not apply to evaluation of the budget?
So there are two parts. Essentially, you'll prepare the science. There's the science document, science and technical management, as well as an anonymized budget. That will all be provided to the panel for evaluation during DAPR. After merit scores are determined, you also provide, when you're doing your proposals, you also provide expertise and resources document in which you describe the expertise of everybody who's on the team. And you demonstrate that you have access to the facilities you need and that you have the expertise to actually carry out the work you're proposing. But the panel does not see that until after they've decided on the merit score of the science.
And the expertises document would have the names of the team members, correct?
Yes, that is not anonymized.
Right, yeah. Another question in the chat is, can funding be requested for studies on meteorite samples?
Yes, just make sure it's within the scope of whichever program you are applying to.
Another question says, hi, Katie, great talk, so useful. Just to make sure I understand correctly, a Canadian institution would not be able to propose a project without a US affiliation?
Yep, need to have a US affiliation in order to receive NASA funding.
Okay. Is that all the questions you had, Alex?
Yes, those were all the questions we had.
Well, I don't see any more questions. I see several things saying, thank you, great talk, and things like that.
Love it.
So, Alex, can you show the next slide, please?
Yes, give me 1 second.
Hey, I just wanted to do a little bit of advertising here for LPI's next event, which will be coming up at the end of January. It's a workshop it's called Itokawa and the Dawn of Asteroidal Sample Return, meant to cover the beginnings of asteroidal sample return and the general topic of asteroid meteorite connections. So stay tuned for the program of that to be posted sometime soon. So thank you again, Katie. And thanks to everybody who listened, and thank you, Alex.
Thank you for the invitation. I hope it was helpful.
It was great. So have a good day, everyone.
Have a great day.